I'm not sure we can hear her.
Alexandra, pode falar um pouquinho? I haven't heard, I don't.
Okay, Barbara. Okay, Barbara, go ahead.
Begin.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Barbara Bozak, and I welcome you in the name of the Grassroots Taskforce of the NGO Committee for Social Development here at the UN to this webinar, Food Insecurity, Youth from the Grassroots Speak Out in the Context of the COVID-19 Crisis. As its name suggests, the Grassroots Taskforce has as its goal to bring to the UN the voice of people on the ground, those who are often invisible to those in positions of power. Before we begin our event, we have a few technical things that we would like to deal with. The first reminder is we ask you to mute your microphone if you're not speaking, and that is to avoid any unnecessary background noise that would be a distraction. The second is that one of our respondents, Alexandra Mustafa, will be speaking in Portuguese. We will have simultaneous translation into English for her. At that time, before she begins, we will give you a moment to open the interpretation, and I will explain how to do that so you can listen to the interpretation in English. If you have any questions in the course of this side event, please write them in the chat box and we will deal with questions toward the end of our program. And our event includes 4 short videos, which bring the voices from the grassroots, from different countries. And 3 of those videos will not be in English. The voices will not be in English. They'll be in other languages. And we will not have simultaneous translation. However, there are English subtitles, so we ask you to follow those subtitles as those videos are being presented. So we begin our program this morning with 2 short videos in which we will hear young people from 2 different countries speak of food insecurity. The first video, sent by the Salesian missionaries, comes from the Kakuma refugee camp in northern Kenya, an area facing food insecurity due to climate change. The second video, which is quite different, comes to us through Vivat International and addresses the nexus between extractive industries, COVID-19, and food insecurity in Indonesia. The one from Kenya, the voice is in English. The one from Indonesia will have subtitles. Despina will now begin them. Thank you.
My name is Judith Wamalwa, alumni at Don Bosco Technical Institute. My name is Judith Wamalwa, alumni at Don Bosco Technical Institute. Kakuma refugee camp is located nearly 130 kilometers from Lodwar, which is the largest city in Turkana County. The camp is managed by RAS, UNHCR, working together with other implementing agencies. When it comes to food security in Turkana County, and specifically in Kakuma refugee camp, we receive food commodities from various places, We have the food that comes from outside the country and that comes within the counties in Kenya. The effects of COVID-19 has rendered many people in the camp jobless, and they are not in a position to buy some of this food because of lack of money. Another challenge is the dry season that is currently being experienced has led to many boreholes drying up. So this is one of the major challenges that is affecting our agricultural activities. We want to speak to the UN community, other international NGOs, that there is a need to invest heavily in Kakuma. There is also need to ensure that the farm inputs, especially maybe seeds, we have fertilizers, to ensure that once these crops are planted, they come out successfully. The other maybe need that we can say is that the issue of machinery. Given the nature of the land and the desert setup of this county, the ground is very hard and we need machineries like tractors to help farmers in plowing.
Je m'appelle Nzabonipa Musekura Fabien. Je suis de la nationalité congolaise. Le travail que je fais ici, je suis ménagère du chat. Ce que je fais, je cultive quelques légumes différents, tels que le morere, du sombe et le bamia, ainsi de suite. Et puis, le marché semble être beau. Ce qui nous coûte cher ici, c'est l'eau. Ici, nous sommes dans un endroit désertique. Nous n'avons pas beaucoup d'eau. C'est ce qui nous fatigue ici. Si on pourrait trouver beaucoup d'eau, on pourrait épanouir même les chats. Mais comme nous n'avons pas d'eau, nous cultivons à petite quantité. Nous cultivons peu de chats.
My name is Metut. I'm a South Sudanese by nationality. I'm a first student of Don Bosco. I did agriculture course and obtained my certificate. With the knowledge and skill I acquired, I am able to do farming. This year, I planting vegetable like spinach, okra, kale, and others. As for now, you can see my crop are dying because of lack of water. Due to the drought, my income activities has been affected.
Praktek industri ekstraktif di Indonesia tahun-tahun terakhir terus semakin banyak dan masif, entah itu di bidang pertambangan atau juga bahkan perkebunan berskala besar yang menguasai wilayah hutan dan lahan milik masyarakat adat. Penguasaan hutan dan lahan ini terus bertambah, entah itu di lahan gambut atau tanah liat, lahan hutan sebagai wilayah tanah liat. Keanekaragaman hayat terus terancam oleh perluasan industri ekstraktif dan kesejahteraan pangan yang terancam. Pandemi COVID-19 ini juga telah menyebar kemana-mana sejak awal tahun 2020. Di level nasional dan lokal, terdapat banyak orang terinfeksi oleh pandemik ini, dan juga jumlahnya semakin meningkat. Apalagi saat ini muncul varian yang baru. Maka pemerintah Indonesia sejak awal sudah mewajibkan semua penduduk untuk taat pada protokol kesehatan, yaitu menggunakan masker, wajib mencuci tangan, jaga jarak, pembatasan kerumunan. Hal ini juga berlaku larangan bepergian kemana-mana, termasuk pergi bekerja atau ke sekolah.
Berbagi. Terima kasih Pak. Inilah kegiatan sore yang kami lakukan dari kelompok kami, Kelompok Namun Bangkal, yang dimana ini adalah alternatif terakhir yang kami lakukan selama pandemi COVID-19 yang berlangsung. Dan juga ini kami lakukan karena kami kesulitan untuk mencari kebutuhan di lingkungan kami, terutama mencari kebutuhan untuk dapur, yang mana juga penyebabnya adalah karena industri yang ekstraktif yang berada di lingkungan kami, menyebabkan kami tidak bisa kemana-mana, lahan kami sudah habis.
Begitulah fakta dampak dari aktivitas industri ekstraktif. Ada bencana alam dan berakibat pada krisis iklim. Di sisi lain, itu mengancam hak asasi manusia. Salah satu hak yang dilanggar adalah hak atas kedaulatan pangan. Hak atas pangan ini dirampas oleh perluasan wilayah industri ekstraktif yang sangat masif. Lahan dan ladang masyarakat selalu terancam, maka keberlanjutan pangan juga terancam.
Apa aksi yang kami lakukan? Kita tahu bahwa dampak industri ekstraktif dan pandemik ini meresahkan, baik secara ekonomi, kesehatan, dan pendidikan khusus untuk kaum muda dan masyarakat di kampung. Karena itu, kami berinisiatif memanfaatkan lahan yang ada, dengan konsep memanfaatkan lahan untuk kestabilan ekonomi tanpa merusak hutan. Anak-anak muda adat Dayak Manyan di Barito Timur, Kalimantan Tengah membersihkan lahan yang ada. Kelompok anak muda ini bernama Pemuda Kawal Kampung. Mereka menebas, membakar, dan mengolah tanah untuk menanam. Secara bergotong royong melakukan persiapan lahan hingga menanam. Hal yang sama juga dilakukan oleh sekelompok masyarakat adat Dayak Tomuan di Kalimantan Tengah. Namanya Kelompok Tani Bangkal. Mula-mula mereka bersama-sama membuka satu lahan di pekarangan rumah untuk dijadikan sebagai contoh. Laki-laki dan perempuan, para pemuda dan orang dewasa saling bergotong royong untuk membersihkan lahan. Para pegiat GPIC Kalimantan sebagai pendamping komunitas ikut memberikan contoh dalam hal pemanfaatan lahan untuk mendukung ekonomi di masa sulit. Kegiatan pertanian yang ramah lingkungan yang tentunya menjadi inspirasi dan wadah belajar bagi masyarakat di kampung-kampung. Lahan yang sudah disiapkan itu ditanami dengan tanaman hortikultura yang mudah diperoleh. Jenis tanaman adalah sayur mayur, cabai, timun, jagung, dan berternak ikan. Ini adalah tanaman yang sehat dan tidak merusak lingkungan. Dan mereka lakukan aktivitas ini dengan satu tekad untuk dapat menghasilkan dan memenuhi pertama-tama kebutuhan keluarga sehari-hari, dan jika mencukupi, maka mereka akan berbagi ke masyarakat sekitar melalui pasar.
Kami dapat membantu biaya sekolah, biaya kesehatan, dan membantu teman-teman yang terdampak pandemi COVID-19.
Kami punya harapan besar kepada UN dan pemerintah Indonesia. Pertama, supaya mendukung inisiatif kaum muda masyarakat adat, kalau bisa secara finansial dan teknologi, supaya bisa meningkatkan produksi pangan lokal kami demi ketersediaan dan keterjangkauan makanan bagi keluarga-keluarga kami yang terdampak krisis pada masa pandemi ini. Yang kedua, melindungi hak-hak masyarakat adat dan memberi akses kepada masyarakat adat untuk memiliki hak atas tanah dan hutan, karena tanah dan hutan bagi kami masyarakat adat Dayak adalah sumber penghidupan demi ketahanan dan keberlanjutan pangan, serta menjamin hak pengelolaan tanah dan menjamin hak atas benih asli pangan kami.
So we saw these two videos from two very different places, one from Kenya refugee camp and one from Indonesia, and two different realities. And now we would like to hear from our first respondent, who is Mr. Miroslav Budimir. He is a researcher at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, and his work is focused on food poverty, food waste, and food redistribution. Prior to this position, he was working with unaccompanied and separated migrant children and refugee families with small children in Serbia. So he had a very interesting experience. Miroslav, would you please briefly describe your work with food insecurity and how what we have heard on the videos intersects with your research? Insofar as it does, how can what we have heard from Kenya and Indonesia inform our understanding of food insecurity and ways to address it? How would you respond to the ideas and recommendations that the youth from Kenya and Indonesia posted at the end of their videos? You have 7 minutes. We look forward to hearing from you. So the floor is yours, Miroslav.
Thank you, Barbara. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be with you today and to have an opportunity to share some thoughts and insights from my own research that maybe could be useful, particularly to the young grassroots activists from Kenya, Indonesia, and Brazil. So I'm a social worker and a social policy researcher originally from Serbia, and I'm currently employed as a researcher at the Faculty of Social Work in Ljubljana, Slovenia. I research food poverty and charitable food aid programs in wealthy, food-secure European Union countries, particularly in Slovenia and Finland. And this sort of food insecurity is fundamentally different from the food insecurity in Kenya and in Indonesia and other countries that have a major problem with food supply. So in rich food secure first world countries, they have more than enough food, either from internal production or external import of food and material resources to provide basic social security to all people. Food insecurity or food poverty is the product of income and asset poverty. So the type of food security or poverty that I'm researching is inadequate or insecure access to food due to financial constraints. And that's an embarrassing contradiction that is named want and hunger amid plenty. Because in first world countries, where especially a political and managerial class want us to believe that poverty and hunger are eradicated, which is not true, as repeated food poverty studies in these countries show. And I want to stress that word insecurity, in this syntagma, food insecurity, comes from the police discourse, which is imposed on us without questioning. I think we should use the word food poverty instead of food insecurity. Particularly because of that reason, because of the police state concept of securitization. National states impose its external and internal borders through the nationalization of human rights, citizenship status, state-controlled apparatus, etc. So a police state carry out violent pushbacks from the external state borders, but no less violent, but less visible pushaways from the internal state borders, which are firmly established around social security benefits and services that are not available to the asylum seekers, for example, so-called undocumented migrants, but only to citizens of a particular country. It is well-known phenomenon of welfare chauvinism. That was one of the main reasons why majority of people in Britain voted for Brexit, for example. So language is very important, first thing. Another thing is that food security model is fundamentally opposed to the principles of food sovereignty movement, which promotes the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through sustainable methods, and then their right to define their own food and agricultural system. But today we are talking about completely different kind of food poverty that is primarily caused by the lack of food supply, and not, again, primarily from the income and assets poverty, because these people in Kenya and Indonesia have problem with food supply that comes from their own production, which is vegetable gardening, crop cultivation in Kenya, and forest horticulture in the case of Dayak people. But although I assume that for upper middle and higher classes in Kenya and Indonesia, there are plenty of food supplies, but here we are talking about ordinary people, mostly indigenous people and refugees. So that source of food poverty, which is in focus of our panel today, is lack of food supply, either from internal production or external imported food. So that's very important to understand. That is the major difference between two fundamentally different levels of food poverty, which I will problematize in my research for sure. So it is a question how household food poverty in rich food secure first world countries is interconnected or intersected with this much harsher and dangerous kind of food poverty, which is lack of food supply due to want of adequate seeds, fertilizers, agricultural machinery, and irrigation facilities for cultivating this very demanding soil in desert areas of Kakuma County in Kenya, for example, where is that Kakuma refugee camp located? Or how household food poverty in wealthy food secure first world countries is intersected with food poverty caused by this massively destructive exploitation of forest areas and land that belongs to Dayak people of central Kalimantan. By extractive mining industries and these large-scale plantations that are controlling the land of Dayak people. And because of this expansion of extractive industry practices, we have this biodiversity of their land that is continued to be threatened, terrible smog and flood disasters as a consequence of this deforestations. But they have been deprived of the right to possess, control, and cultivate their own land. Right to food, they are deprived also of right to food, right to development, and all these things that have been taken from Dayak people of central Kalimantan. And now we heard in the video repeatedly that these natural disasters are mainly caused by climate change. But again, language is very important. We should call things by the real names. So this climate blow should not be called climate change. Even the term anthropogenic global warming is misleading because, for example, Dayak forest horticulturalists don't contribute to the warming of the atmosphere nowhere near like the average American citizen, for example. And the average American citizen warms the atmosphere incomparably less than the owners and managers of the global economy, that is 1%. Or a fraction of 1% of the richest and most powerful people in the world. I mean, billionaires, main shareholders and managers of global investment management firms who finance these 100 companies that emit more than 70% of global greenhouse gases. So the right term would be plutocratic global warming and destroying the natural habitats and ancient lands of these indigenous people. And plutocrats, that is owners and managers of the global economy, are the major perpetrators of this crime against humanity. They're the major violators of human rights of indigenous and ordinary people all over the world, and they should be named as such. So food insecurity, food poverty that we have just heard about from testimonies of young grassroots activists from Kenya, Indonesia, is that immensely harsher kind of food poverty, which is in a way consequence of food insecurity in wealthy food secure countries because their governments store their own food surpluses just to artificially regulate the price of that food, because basically to maintain high prices of the food, which would immediately plummet if they open their underground warehouses, depots, and repositories, and distribute millions of tons of food, mainly cheese, butter, grains, etc., on the market or directly to the people. So you know the famous line from the American Nobel laureate, it costs more to store the food than it does to give it. And if the owners or managers of global economy treat people in their own country in that way, what can you expect? How would they treat the other nations and peoples in the world? And that is the moment when all of us, social workers and social justice activists in First World Food Sovereignty Movement with Via Campesina in the lead, with developments in Australia, where right now at least some returning of the land stolen from Aboriginal people is taking place, in association with these other movements of indigenous people and grassroots activists in the global south. We should all join forces to pressure those in power to press our demands for just and fair distribution of basic necessities of life, of seed, fertilizers, agricultural equipment, machinery, and facilities for local sustainable production of food in countries where there is a problem food supply from internal production. We heard that they hope quite appropriately.
Can you wrap up, please? Okay.
Okay, I will wrap up. Okay. I assume they should approach all UN aid agencies that have their national representations and missions in Kenya, Indonesia, like the UNHCR, UNICEF, UNDP, UN Women, and through them to urgently appeal to the UN Food Agriculture Organization that has special programs and funds for agriculture equipment and machines. these varieties of grains, beans, and vegetables, fertilizers, and irrigation facilities. I assume you all know right now there is a rapid response and mitigation plan to avert a humanitarian catastrophe in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. And there are funds allocated for these catastrophes. $130 million is now urgently requested for this assistance to highly vulnerable communities in drought-hit regions of these three countries. So FAO is also carrying out cash transfers and cash for work programs to ensure the most vulnerable can access food. So I think that young grassroots activists from Kakuma County should send their message and urgent request to the representatives of the main USAID agencies in their country, and to them to press their demands for funding of necessary means for agricultural food production that would provide food security and a source of income to people in Kakuma refugee camp and Kakuma counties. Same for activists in Indonesia.
Thank you, Miroslav.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, you've brought up some very interesting points, including the importance of language and food poverty rather than food insecurity, and what that means, and the intersection actually of what's happening in some of the wealthy countries and some of the poor countries, and the fact that they do interact with one another, and the people that are controlling this, as you call them, the plutocrats, the people that they're very wealthy ones. So I think there's a lot for us to think about, and then we'll have a chance for you to respond again briefly later on. So thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. And now we have two more videos, short videos that we would like to watch. These videos come from two very different realities in Brazil. They're both from Brazil, and they were sent to us by the congregations of St. Joseph. The first video shows two women who are involved with food production in Rio Grande do Sul, which is in the south of Brazil, outside of Porto Alegre. They are both outside of Porto Alegre. And the second video is from a woman in Bahia in the Northeast, where she suffers from lack of food as a daily occurrence. So they're two very different ones with subtitles.
Meu nome é Denise Zanotto Pigato, eu sou pequena agricultora e empreendedora no ramo de agroindústrias. A gente, na verdade, iniciou o nosso trabalho com agricultura orgânica e depois, com o passar do tempo, a gente resolveu investir então na produção da agroindústria.
Eu sou a Fátima Camati Chiarello, sou agricultora, nasci e resido até hoje aqui no município de Nova Roma do Sul, no Rio Grande do Sul. Trabalho com produção de uvas, juntamente com o meu marido e meus filhos.
O que acontece com o excedente da nossa produção? Muitas vezes, como a gente produz pães, biscoitos, cucas, esse tipo de produto, ele é um produto que ele não tem uma validade muito longa. Então, sempre que a gente vê que a validade dele está ficando próxima, ou que a gente não vai ter o que fazer com esse produto, a gente procura destinar esse produto para alguma entidade, algum projeto, algum grupo que possa usar esse produto dentro da validade, ainda dentro da qualidade que ele tem, né, sem que ele tenha perdido nenhum dos seus princípios básicos de qualidade. Desde que a pandemia começou, a gente teve bastante dificuldades para trabalhar, por vários motivos. Como a gente é uma agroindústria familiar, a gente sempre trabalhou muito com festas, eventos e feiras. As feiras eram o nosso carro-chefe, era onde a gente vivia, basicamente a nossa agroindústria vivia. Então, no início da pandemia foi muito difícil para a gente se manter no mercado, para a gente continuar trabalhando. Mas aos poucos a gente foi se adequando, foi buscando as redes sociais, foi divulgando o nosso trabalho. E graças a Deus a gente conseguiu, né? Graças ao nosso trabalho, a Deus e ao nosso trabalho, a gente conseguiu então se manter, né?
A gente teve sim uma temporada que a gente precisou ficar em isolamento, ficou parado, então não tinha como escoar a produção e tal, mas a gente conseguiu se adaptar, né? E então depois, com a chegada da vacina e etc., as coisas foram melhorando.
Governos, eles tivesse algum tipo de incentivo fiscal, algum tipo de incentivo que o agricultor, ele dissesse, não, o governo vai me ajudar, vai me dar um incentivo, então eu não vou deixar esse excedente jogado fora, eu vou doar esse excedente, eu vou ajudar outras famílias, eu acho que seria assim bastante interessante. Também o governo poderia disponibilizar algum entreposto, algum transporte que pudesse fazer essa coleta e essa distribuição de alimentos.
A gente precisaria de linhas de crédito mais acessíveis, com menos burocracias. Para quê? Porque assim, a cada ano a gente está enfrentando sempre mais dificuldades, com secas, com invernos rigorosos. Então agora a gente está passando por um momento muito difícil por causa da seca. Então assim, precisa um investimento muito alto para você ter acesso à irrigação. Então deveria haver mais apoio para aplicar nessas propriedades açudes, cisternas e armazenamento de água da chuva.
A gente vê também nas cidades maiores que o governo tem, às vezes, muitos terrenos, muitos lugares que estão lá, que acabam virando depósito de lixo. Por que não se fazer uma horta comunitária? Por que não se doar esses terrenos, sei lá, para essas entidades e que elas possam fazer hortas comunitárias, projetos sociais, trabalhos que a gente vê que são tão importantes, que acabam fazendo com que a criminalidade diminua, que a falta de autoestima das pessoas ela diminua, porque as pessoas, quando tu não tem comida, quando tu não tem saneamento básico, quando tu não tem uma casa boa para morar, tu não é gente, tu não se sente gente, né? Tu é gente, mas tu não se sente gente.
Até os próprios municípios poderiam criar uma rede onde pudesse ser aproveitado tudo isso. Sempre há a sobra. E muitas vezes essa sobra ela é ótima, ela é perfeita para ser consumida, para você preparar um prato, para alimentar quem sente fome. Sempre tem a sobra e sempre é possível ajudar. Porque a gente sempre costuma dizer que é muito melhor, a gente se sente muito melhor ajudando do que precisando ser ajudado.
Bom dia, eu sou Rita de Cássia, tenho 23 anos, moro aqui já vai entrar já para 3 anos, tenho 3 filhos, um de 9 anos, um de 5 e um de 1 mês e 18 dias. Venho de uma família de 10 filhos também, eu sou a primeira que a minha mãe teve. A gente vem do sítio de Sem Terra, aqui foi o último que eu parei. Entendeu? Por causa que assim, eu sei o que é acordar de manhã e não ter um café da manhã. E quando eu dizia, mãe, me dá um prato de comida, ela chorava e dizia, minha filha, não tem, você vai para a escola com fome hoje. Eu tô aqui hoje, meu esposo trabalha em Atalaia, por causa que aqui em Rio Largo ele não teve acesso nenhum a trabalho. E o que ele ganha é muito pouco também, que a gente já chegamos também a passar necessidade. Aí a gente precisamos de toda a ajuda possível. O povo precisa de toda a ajuda possível, entendeu? Por causa devido a essa pandemia, aí piorou foi tudo. Piorou o desemprego, médico, e a gente sem um trabalho, sem um acesso, a fome aperta mais. Entendeu? Por causa que a pessoa diz assim, mas eu penso no próximo, sim, mas não adianta você pensar. Você tem que pensar com gesto, entendeu? Com ajuda. Pronto, exemplo, eu digo, eu vou orar por você, sim, a oração vai te alimentar espiritual, e a tua barriga, quem vai alimentar? A gente quando tem fome, a gente quer naquela hora. Imagina uma criança, quando ela pede um pão, e a pessoa olhar dentro do armário e não encontrar, porque essa possibilidade eu já me encontrei também. Quando a minha filha Miriam, de 9 anos, ela disse, mãe, eu estou com fome, eu vou para a escola, e eu olhei no armário e não tinha. Eu disse, meu Deus, me ajuda. Mas se tivesse mais humanidade, eu tenho certeza que naquela hora que ela pediu pão, eu tinha dado um pão a ela. Mas o mundo não é dessa maneira. Eu sei que o mundo não gira em torno da gente. Mas a humanidade, o amor ao próximo, devia ter mais. E eu tô aqui não é porque eu tenho acesso a uma casa, não. Tô aqui porque eu preciso. Porque cada um que mora aqui precisa. A minha casa não tem um bujão de gás, não. Tenho não. Mas eu sou feliz assim mesmo. Eu cozinho no fogo de energia quando tem. A energia é tudo gambiarra. Se passa uma carreta, pouco fio. A gente tem que tirar do bolso modo pagar de onde não tem. Senão fica no escuro. Eu falei também sobre o acesso à água, que aqui a gente não tem. Pronto, quando eles vinham, eu estava ali enchendo uns bujão aqui de água sanitária mesmo, que a gente não temos assim o acesso. Não é fácil não. Assim, para um banho, para uma roupa. E eu operada aqui, tive mais dificuldade ainda, que ele foi cesáreo, até para dar um banho, uma alimentação. Por causa que, veja bem, uma alimentação feita com bujão de água sanitária, eu acho que ninguém quer não, entendeu? E na minha opinião, os governadores deviam pensar mais nas comunidades, os prefeitos também, por causa que os prefeitos só encontram as pessoas no lugar de voto, na hora do voto.
So we have just seen those two very, very different realities in Brazil. One, obviously, where people are growing food or producing food and would like to share more of it. And another one where there's tremendous need. And we have as a respondent for these two videos, Dr. Alexandra Mustafa, a professor at the University of Pernambuco, which is in the northeast of Brazil. And it is located in one of the poorest regions of Latin America where hunger is endemic. She has worked in Brazilian favelas, the slums of Brazil, in the past, where she addressed the many issues the people face, including hunger. Her work at this time includes identifying, analyzing, and acting to confront food insecurity in Brazil, especially as it is experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll present my question to you, Alexandra, and then I will speak about getting the interpretation. Okay, so we'll have to wait 1 minute for that. So Alexandra, we would like you to please briefly describe your work and how it intersects with what you have heard on these two videos, both from Brazil. How might you respond to the persons on the videos? The one who faces hunger daily and seeking to feed her children as well as herself, and the two who seek ways to share the excess that they often have. And they would like to do that with those who lack food. So we will give you 7 minutes. But before I give the floor to you, I would like to say to our audience, Alexandra will speak in Portuguese. We have simultaneous translation for her. In order to access the simultaneous translation, you need to go to at the bottom of your screen where there is a globe icon under which is written the word interpretation. If you click on that icon, you will see off English and Portuguese. To hear the English simultaneous translation, you need to click on the English. So if you would do that, if you do not understand Portuguese, we ask that you please click on the English. If you understand Portuguese, you do not need to do that. So Alexandra, we look forward to hearing from you, and you have the floor now. Pode falar.
Bom dia.
Good morning.
Eu quero dizer que estou muito feliz de
I'd like to say that I'm very happy to be in this discussion and to speak about the Brazilian situation. I think
Your
this.
microphone is muted, Alessandra.
Alexandra, you're muted.
You're muted.
mas as
The favelas that we saw, they exist in all the capitals of Brazil. I live in the Northeast, in the poorest region of Brazil, where there are many, many favelas. Because of the bad, unequal distribution of land, because of the exodus from the rural areas and the failure to have any policy for resettlement. When I was studying, I actually did an insertion, a practical experience in a favela called Vietnam. It was in Recife. And it received the name of Vietnam because the people invaded the urban areas at the time of the war in Vietnam. And it was a favela where the police used to expel the people. There was a lot of violence, and that gave rise to the name Vietnam. In that favela, I worked with a group of women, and it was using the Paulo Freire method, starting with the stories of life. And the people, the women recognized the life stories and how the causes, the issues relating to their situation arose. They came to understand that they had to come together to struggle against poverty and hunger. They struggled. They also struggled against the mud that was invading the whole area where the favela was. There was a group of sisters who used to work with Don Helder Câmara, the Bishop of Recife at that time. And they worked in the communities as women, with children, to try and fight against poverty and hunger. And I was involved in this group. And afterwards, there arose another favela that came into existence. And it was beginning there, and I went to live in that favela because at that time, the theology of liberation was allowing and inviting us to, as young people, to have experiences with those who were the poorest. In the second favela, I lived for 6 years. I got married, and we lived 6 years in the Villa of Miracles. That was the name, the town of miracles. That was the name that the people who dwelled there gave the community. In this favela, many people, many women especially, organized themselves in groups of mothers, really, to struggle for their rights, to struggle for health, for their basic needs to be met. For example, water, health, light, electricity, being able to get shoes, being able to send their children to school. They even created a little cooperative, and that became a little business, was right in the favela, and they would collect milk and other refrigerated items to make them available to the others. And with this, they wanted to bring an end, and they were able to move towards ending the hunger in that community. This experience highlighted for me the indispensable importance of working to raise awareness of the population, to conscientize them. Why? Because a population that's aware can claim their rights. It's able to struggle for change. These young people that we've just seen in the videos, for example, the second video, she's from a people and she has a certain consciousness, awareness of the reality. But there needs to be a political awareness raising in order to organize, as in the epoch in the 80s, that where the social movements and the movements of people to defend the dwellers in the slums, in the favelas, there were movements about community schools, etc. They agreed to come together, to organize themselves, and to demand the fulfillment of their basic needs. And this is what she sees the relevance would be for this today. Today, I think we as social workers at global level, we need to organize ourselves through the association of the International Association of Schools of Social Work. I think we have an understanding that all of this is a cause, and it's resulting from the capitalist mode of production. And we understand that the organization, such as the United Nations, has a role to play, a global role to defend the goals, for example, the Millennium Development Goals and now the Sustainable Development Goals, to eradicate hunger in the world. And because of this, I believe that work to identify the sort of the little areas where poverty is concentrated, the raising of consciousness of people who are living in favelas. And I think work like this came from social workers, and it can today, with the support of the UN, could reach the goals of the millennium and sustainable. It's not enough that there's just social programs. They're not enough. They change when one government goes out and there's another government comes in. In Brazil, we had managed under the governments of Lula and Dilma to really end 50% of the hunger within the country. We took Brazil away from the map of hunger in the world. But then with the extreme right, with Bolsonaro, Brazil has gone back onto the hunger map of the world. And it shows us that there's a need for an awareness raising of the population to elect representatives who are not against their interests and their needs. And could you bring this to a conclusion? So for this, I would say it's only the work of a deep awareness raising that is able, organization that's able to remove people from the hunger that's both material and of awareness.
Hear the importance, especially of organizing people so that they become the protagonists of their own future, helping people to claim their own rights and find ways of moving against the structures that exist. An election of good officials, absolutely, in the government, but people need to become aware of their rights, of what their possibilities are. And that's a very important topic that I think we can certainly keep in mind as we move through the different crises that we are facing. Thank you, Alexandra. Before we move on to our next speaker, I would just remind those of you who have joined us, if you would like to pose a question to either of the speakers, any of the speakers, please put that in the chat box and we will respond to those questions as best we can in a short time. At this time, we have our third panelist, who is Mr. Augustine Kahira Bahemuka, who is a Ugandan lawyer and human rights specialist with over 20 years experience working with UNDP and other UN agencies throughout Africa and the Middle East. He has just presently moved to Iraq, where he is working at this point. He has been focused on working to bring an end to poverty and hunger through legal empowerment and the protection of property rights. He is passionate about using the human rights framework and the SDGs as tools to alleviate poverty, to eliminate hunger, and realize other human rights. Augustine, based on your longtime experience working with the UN, how do you think we can support and help the people we've heard on the videos, as well as provide tangible solutions to the issue of food insecurity, or as Miroslav said, food poverty? We look forward to your remarks, Augustine, and you have 7 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for also hosting me this evening. Here it is evening. And I would like to thank the presenters also. Very enriching presentations. And some of them also already gave some solutions, possible solutions. And so for me, I'll concentrate on mainly what the UN proposes, though I'm speaking in my individual capacity, but I know that the UN has a framework of addressing almost all these issues which have been raised. For example, they have the agenda, the 2030, which is normally called the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. This is something which, the document which was adopted to address hunger, to reduce poverty, to address inequalities, and to promote human rights for all. They emphasize for all. So, but the bottom line is to make sure that the people are participating in all processes at all levels, especially in making decisions which affect them. For example, the youth who, if they want to reduce hunger, to address poverty, there should be platforms where they should participate and their voices are amplified so that they are heard by the politicians, because the politicians are the ones who allocate resources. I think Alexandra mentioned, the youth should be able to elect people who listen to them and address their issues. So these platforms should be encouraged by the UN, where the youth can be listened to, and then their voices actually taken into account. That's why the UN adopted the human rights-based approach, because as I mentioned before, the frameworks are there, starting from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that everybody is born free and equal. So if everybody is born free and equal, so we should be free. There shouldn't be people who are having hunger, yet there are others who are having plenty, as we saw in the videos. There are some in the same Brazil, there are those who have plenty of food they want to share, but they are not even able to share because there is no mechanism for them to share with the people who don't have. So the most important aspect of the Agenda 2030 is leaving no one behind. It has been emphasized, and I can't also emphasize it enough. the agenda tries to make sure that every person, every voice counts. Nobody should be left behind, and governments should make deliberate attempts to target especially those who are farthest behind and those who are likely to fall behind because of circumstances. For example, if there's environmental degradation, there is no rain, so they need to, for example, provide irrigation for those people who may not have, may not be able to plant crops because there is no rain. But the government is there to provide facilities, facilitate people to access clean and safe water, to make sure they are able to plant their crops and then feed themselves. And even the extra should be, there should be a mechanism to sell it to those who may have money, but they don't have land where to grow crops. So that brings me also to the problem of access to land. We saw in one of the videos, the lady in Brazil doesn't have access to land. She doesn't have anywhere to grow crops. They are landless. But who should provide that kind of access to land? I think it's the government should provide that kind of land. But then how would the government know if they don't have a platform where they can listen to the landless and then decide what to provide and where to provide those kind of facilities? Good enough we have, as Miroslav, Miroslav mentioned, the UN has different agencies which address different things, but in the sum total is to make sure that the human being is the focus. The human being is the focus of all UN interventions. You find the Food and Agriculture Organization tries to address issues to do with the food security. UNDP will address the governance of it. You find UNHCR and they will address specific populations like the refugees and displaced. You'll find that the WFP will distribute food, physical food. But what we are talking about now is sustainable use of land. As we saw in Indonesia, is it Indonesia? Yes. The land is there because of the extractive industries. There's floods have come, people are being displaced, there is pollution, and then while in Kakuma there is no rain, not because of, also because of climate change. All of those things, the UN has mechanisms of addressing them. But the problem, as Alexandra mentioned, people are not aware. They are not aware where to go and how to engage. So I think there is need to really empower people because knowledge is power. For example, I can give an example. The UN adopted a youth strategy for 2030 to make sure that the youth are effectively participating in influencing the Agenda 2030. But if you ask in the audience how many people have ever seen this strategy, you'll find that there are only a few. Just because they are not aware, they are not made aware of that kind of information. It sets out how the youth can engage and how the youth can be consulted and how the youth can affect decisions which are made, because the youth are the ones, the future, they are the future of the planet. They are going to stay here longer than most of us. But are they, why do we continue to make decisions on which will affect them when we have long gone? So those platforms which they gather the voices of the youth, amplify them, and then they are acted upon. It is not enough to listen, but you must act. Governments must act and make sure that they address those issues, because the people who know, who feel the pinch, are the ones who know where to scratch. So they will tell you this is how this issue can be addressed, other than the top down, where you say maybe the government can come and say, these are the solutions we are bringing for you. UN can come and say, oh, these are the solutions. No, it doesn't work like that. Different areas have different problems, and they have different solutions. And you cannot use the one size fits all. So every voice counts, and every voice has a different approach to resolve the issue which they are facing. So there are quite a number of things I'm wrapping up, which were raised, and I think some of them is access to markets, access to fertilizers, access to technology, access to skills. The youth need to be skilled. If they are not skilled enough, they will not, even if they grow crops, they will not be able to produce enough which they can, with surplus of which they can sell. So there are so many issues which needs to be tackled in this area, and I think UN working together with the governments, because the governments have the primary responsibility to take care of their citizens. The UN can only facilitate, and through the UN Sustainable Development frameworks, because now all the countries where the UN works, and works in almost all countries, they design sustainable development cooperation frameworks, which are specifically designed to address issues of how to move the Agenda 2030, which is and see how it's being implemented in the different countries. So the UN can assist and will support making sure that all the voices are collected, they are heard, and actually addressed by the government. If the government has challenges, they address them when they're identifying the kind of strategies to adopt, and then the UN is able to assist and support the governments. Yeah. Okay.
You brought up some very interesting and very important points, and you did connect it to each of everybody that participated thus far, the videos and the other speakers. So really appreciate that. Certainly the importance of giving people a platform and education essential so that changes can occur. And the point absolutely that governments are the ones that bring about the change frequently, but they need to be brought up to speed. They need to know what's happening, and we need to elect good leaders so that they will do that. The UN has power, moral power to help people or governments think about certain things, but they can't influence it. So every country has to do see what is needed in their own situation. So I thank you. We have about 15 minutes left. So I would like, if there are any questions, Despina, maybe we can take about 5 minutes for questions if there are any in the chat box.
Yes, Barbara. So we have one question from Queen Mother, and she wants to know what is the youth doing to grow their own food. So we welcome the speakers to address this first question.
So
does anybody?
Any of the speakers have a response to that? What are youth doing to grow their own food? We welcome your input on that. If you don't, we understand. I mean, I think we saw it in Indonesia, organizing themselves locally, and I'm sure they're doing it. They learn and then they do that. But
and Paul has already shared in the chat box that the two groups in Kalimantan, Indonesia, they use the lands around their villages to plant vegetables and crops manually during this pandemic. Jamal recommends, that one way to achieve food security is to start cultivating yourself, and the family farming, the system of family farming can be a way to achieve this goal. Unless we have a response from our panelists, I would say we can move to our second question, if that's okay.
Yes,
Yeah, the second question comes from a youth representative, who thinks it's important to not just have youth as people who point out these issues, but also as partners in the solutions. And what role do you see the youth playing in capacity building for solutions for this problem in your local context?
Miroslav, Alexandra, Augustine.
Well,
yeah, okay.
I'm not sure which one is speaking.
Maybe I can take that one, and then Miroslav can add. I think the youth already they have the answers. They need to organize themselves, and they need to identify certain skills they need in order to be able to effectively participate in agriculture and farming, not only for their own consumption, but as a commercial venture where they can earn a living as well, where they are able to sell and pay school fees, for example, where they're able to sell and build their own houses, where they're able to sell and even improve on their livelihoods. Yeah, so they need to, some of the things they can do is to come together, identify the skill gaps, and then suggest to their governments or to other agencies that, this is what we are missing, and we need to be skilled in this so that we are able to effectively carry out agriculture, and so that there is food security within the location. Over to you.
Miroslav?
Yes, I think the great importance in international connections between different youth movements in Kenya, Indonesia, Brazil, or wherever, and in the global north. So they must raise their voice about these issues we are talking about food poverty in their own countries, and connect with all the movements that are very active today. Food sovereignty movement, most important in this area, then global movements of indigenous people, all kinds of grassroots activists in global south and global north. So they should connect. You cannot do much only at national level, especially if you have corrupt governments, as most of us today have, unfortunately. So international connections, raising the voice, pressing demands to the UN aid agencies, and then through them back to the national governments, and embarrass them as much as possible to do what is their share to do. So that's my point.
Alexandra, algumas palavras para nós?
Sim. Aqui no Brasil existe.
In Brazil, there is a conflict between big business that is really large companies producing for export, and family farming, which really is focused on domestic or needs. Family farming really needs support in order to produce more food for the people, and it needs, and the large landowners and big business only produce for export, and they produce things that are not edible. And so with these experiences, there needs to be work with the family farmers in the Northeast and also in the South. It needs support. The federal government cut almost all the resources, all the money that was going into policies that was helping family farming. The current government cut those support.
I would just give each of you, if you would like, 2 minutes or so for closing remarks, since our time is coming to an end very shortly. Which one of you would like to begin? Augustine, would you like to make a few closing remarks? Any last words of wisdom for us?
Okay, thank you very much. But I think just to emphasize that the framework is already in place. We just need to popularize it, make sure everybody is aware of what the framework is, and then we should be able to engage our governments and also make sure that we participate in decision making, especially the youth. They should not shy away from demanding, because they are rights holders, they have rights, and the duty bearers are well known. If they don't know them, it is the government, the primary duty holder. And the youth have the right as citizens to organize themselves and demand that their rights are addressed. If they have concern, they are addressed. But then to also presuppose that there is a democratic dispensation in the country. Some countries will not even want people to organize at all. So the whole thing is interlinked to both civil, political, and economic rights. So, and the UN, of course, encourages a holistic approach where you address both political, economic, and social and cultural rights as a whole, and putting the youth or the human being at the center of all these processes, where they are the primary rights holders, while the governments and other bodies are the duty bearers, and they are being given a voice, and then their voices are being heard, and then they are which we call if they are effective participation in decision making, and that's what we demand, that youth are given a voice, their voices are heard, and their voices are acted upon as rights holders.
Thank you. Thank you. Miroslav?
Yes, I totally agree with Augustine. There is a famous sentence that I think Franklin Delano Roosevelt said before the New Deal in America. He said to the activists, "Make me do it." You know, we must put the pressure on our political leaders, but if the majority of people are passive and obedient in global north, and also in the countries in countries of the global south, where there are a significant number of middle-class people also, because we cannot put the blame on the people who are helpless, who are in the situation of absolute poverty. So pressing our demands, voicing the issues, international connection, taking to the streets, and just making the leaders do what they have to do. And they already know what they have to do. And just to direct the attention to this newest Food Agriculture Organization plan, it's very important. 120 million is already, I think, allocated for this help to invest into the agricultural facilities, especially in the Horn of Africa. So that's my last message for this.
Thank you. Alessandra, pode dir algumas últimas palavras para nós?
Eu gostaria de propor,
I would like to propose something for the UN and the International Association of Social Workers to set up a task force in which the issues relating to the hotspots of poverty in the world, and that social workers could identify with the people the needs of each area, but also their potential, their ability to develop really a work of conscientization with the support of the United Nations and the support of the International Association of Schools of Social Work in the countries, and have social workers involved. I think this work could identify the needs and the potential of people and could help to contribute to the organization and the awareness raising of the global population to achieve the goal, the Millennium Development Goal, to eradicate hunger and poverty.
Thank you very much. I think agora ainda? You know, I really appreciate your insights. It's very interesting to hear from each of you the importance, if you will, of bringing the people on the ground to become protagonists of their own future, to know their rights, to make sure they have the education, to help them organize, and also the responsibility of governments. Certainly the United Nations can help us be aware of people, be aware of rights, and they do offer programs to help people, and we need to educate people along those lines as well. So all of us need to become aware and involved in this process of hopefully bringing an end to Miroslav food poverty and poverty in general and food poverty in particular. We now have, just for a couple of minutes, one of our own to give some closing remarks. It is Professor Lynn Healy, who is the representative to the United Nations of the International Association of Social Workers and also a member of the Grassroots Taskforce. So Lynn, we look forward to your closing remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Barbara. I do have to slightly correct the name of the organization since Alexandra is with us, and she wouldn't forgive me if I didn't say it's actually the International Association of Schools of Social Work, which is the same organization that Alexandra represents on our international board from Brazil. I found the videos and the comments from our speakers to be very moving, actually, not just in an intellectual sense, but in terms of some of the things we witnessed and what each of you testified to. I think we can talk about how people need to be aware of their rights and to invest in their own futures. But when you see the farmers in the Kakuma refugee camp trying to farm that land that has just been devastated by drought, you know, this is a tall order. And obviously their likelihood of success in farming at this point in time due to drought is not likely. You know, we also could take that further and mourn the fact that large refugee camps have been located in areas that are already very stressed in terms of Kenya's situation. So the issues of climate, the issues of water, I think the issue of water came out several times, certainly in Brazil as well. And then in Indonesia, water sometimes being the enemy as well as the solution. The issues around extractive industry in Indonesia, we saw what people traditionally call natural disasters versus man-made disasters, although at a certain level we could certainly label them all as human-caused disasters. We looked at different aspects through the videos of the person in Brazil who's living in extreme poverty and is unable to feed her children properly, and talked about the need for people to be aware of her situation. It's interesting, given Miroslav's very impactful comment about language, that she labeled the situation very accurately. It's hunger, it's not food insecurity. And I think that that word is powerful, and that's probably the reason that public officials no longer use it. We heard many times about policy failures that have aggravated what the situations that have emerged from other efforts. I was also struck with the examples of the success of projects at the grassroots level, environmentally friendly farming efforts, the idea of an agricultural school in the Kakuma refugee camp to teach people how to do farming, and youth organizing to have an impact. The women in Brazil who had great ideas about how to share their excess products and to mobilize ways of making sure the food that is available is available to those who need it, because many times hunger is really a problem of access, not access and poverty, not a problem of actually the amount of food, as Miroslav pointed out at the beginning of his comments. So you have these very successful grassroots efforts that have some local success, but clearly they're not enough. And they raise the question of how do we get, and the speakers in the videos asked, you know, we need support, we need tools, we need fertilizers, we need water. We need control over our own indigenous seeds and not have those taken over by multinationals. We need support, as was pointed out by several speakers, for family farming. And then we need to make family farming lucrative enough to keep youth on the farm, which is a problem, I think, across the world. If you look at the, we didn't go into much in this program about the COVID-19 pandemic, but I believe everywhere that has aggravated the levels of food insecurity across the world. And that has many times simply more sharply illuminated the inequalities that already exist. We have the agenda. Augustine brought up the 2030, the UN's 2030 agenda. And in this program, we have observed the intersection of a number of sustainable development goals, not only goal 2, which is the one on eliminating hunger, but goal 6 on water, goals 5 on gender equality, goal 10 on inequalities, goal 13 on climate change, goal 15 on sustainable land use, and on and on. I think most of them actually were intertwined in this. So we have this big, huge agenda. But as we say, there's an elephant in the room, and that is the lack of political will. How do we get governments across all levels, from local governments to national governments and to the international level, to actually have the political will to make these goals a reality? We are in a very difficult situation here in 2022, looking forward with very little likelihood that the SDGs can be reached. Just some final thoughts. I think that, again, Miroslav's kicked us off with that comment about language. And that's something that's going to stick with me. I think in so many ways, our policymakers often do not like the harsh language that really tells the realities about people who live in poverty. And food insecurity, I think, is one of the prime examples of that. That term, it just doesn't communicate the fact that your child asks for something for breakfast and you don't have anything to feed her. That is hunger and poverty. The idea, again, toward the end, of talking about connection among social movements, I think is a very important one. I'm very impressed always by the voices of youth at the UN and how active youth are in pointing out the issues that face us. So I think it is ultimately this combination of pressing for more political will from the governments and the large NGOs as well, supporting the efforts of organized grassroots efforts on the ground, and encouraging connections among the social movements from youth, from indigenous people, from women's groups. And together we can move a little bit closer to food security for all and the eradication of hunger. So I want to thank everybody, and I will turn it back to Barbara to continue thanking everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Lynn. Those words were really great, and it just brought back to our minds many of the topics or ideas that were presented during this time together. Certainly, we've been very lucky to bring all of you together. We thank those who were able to get the videos, those who did the videos, actually made them, and those that was not an easy task, I can tell you right now, because I was part of that. But then our speakers, we're most grateful to have had those three very wise and competent speakers, who came to us with different backgrounds, from different countries and different experiences. One, a researcher who is dealing with very interesting issues of food poverty in wealthy nations as well as in poor nations. Actually, we had hoped to have a video from a wealthy nation, but that did not happen. Then also Alexandra's very valuable experience in the favelas, the importance of organizing people, the importance of bringing people's voices together so that they become protagonists of their own journey and they can make decisions. And then certainly Augustine, with your tremendous experience at the United Nations and the different programs of the UN, reminding us that the UN has many programs that are accessible. We need to know about them. We need to put them into effect, but we need to move forward ourselves. Things will not be given to us. And the resounding repetition of engaging the youth whose future is being shaped right now. So they need to be part of their own future, and to make sure that we include them, listen to them, and help them make good policies and elect good politicians, we hope. So I do thank all of you who came. I thank you for your participation in our side event today. I hope that what we have done has raised greater awareness of what's happening in different parts of the world and what is happening with regard to food poverty. Both the reality of hunger, which we saw with that woman in Bahia, which is the situation of many, many in our world, even in wealthy countries, but also some ways that groups are trying to address this and bring about an end to what should not exist, because we have sufficient food. We just need to find ways of making sure that everyone has access, can produce food, and has access to the food that is there. It's a human right. So I thank you all. I wish you all a very good day. At this conclusion, it's the last day of the Commission for Social Development. And we hope to see you again online, perhaps, and perhaps in person. Thank you very much, everyone who participated. Goodbye.